This video is sponsored by Contra Returns, a new title in the franchise with classic Contra gameplay and over 200 levels that can be played either solo or in real-time 1-on-1 or 3-on-3 multiplayer. Contra Returns has been nominated for 2 Video Game Audio Awards, Best Music and Best Sound Design, which harken back to the franchise's best tunes. Contra Returns can be played anywhere on the go and is available on the Google Play and iOS app stores. Did you know? The Contra series has a wealth of interesting inspirations across media and the real world, and due to its dedicated fan following, would ultimately become the inspiration for other forms of media. The series' secrets start with the name itself. Contra's title in Japanese is presented in a slightly unusual way. It's written using kanji, but disregards the literal meaning of the symbols to spell out Contra. This is a kind of wordplay called ateji, which disregards the meaning of the words and focuses on their phonetics. However, some fans have speculated that the meanings of the kanji act as a veiled reference. The symbol kon means spirit or soul, the symbol to can mean battle, and ra means a kind of cloth, such as silk. Combined, this would be something along the lines of spirit battle cloth, and could allude to the Rambo-inspired sweatbands the game's playable characters wear. The Japanese version of the original game implies that Contra is a title or rank earned by a soldier, and that a Contra is a master of the fighting spirit and guerrilla tactics. This is almost certainly a nod to Contras, US-backed rebel groups that were active throughout the 1980s which aimed to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. These rebels were known for their use of guerrilla warfare, and made use of jungles for cover and stealth. Not only does Contra's first level have a jungle setting, but the arcade version even had guerrilla-style knife-wielding enemies in the jungle stage on its harder difficulties. The game's ending music is also called Sandinista, a reference to the Sandinista National Liberation Front, the political party the Contras aimed to overthrow. The original Contra introduced 2 prominent recurring characters to the series, Bill Rizer and Lance Bean. Bill's full name is a tribute to the actors Bill Paxton and Paul Rizer, and Lance's full name is a tribute to the actors Lance Henriksen and Michael Bain. These 4 actors played the roles of Private Hudson, Burke, Bishop, and Corporal Hicks in the hit 1986 sci-fi movie Aliens. The Alien franchise also inspired Contra's enemy design, with several xenomorph-inspired creatures appearing throughout the entire series. But it's another alien-focused sci-fi series that impacted Bill and Lance's appearance. The cover for Contra's North American release uses Arnold Schwarzenegger as a reference model for both Bill and Lance, and both reference shots are of Major Alan Dutch Schaefer from 1987's Predator. Bill's pose is from the home movie VHS cover, while Lance's pose is taken from a scene about halfway into the movie itself. This became a trend throughout the long-running series, with various Schwarzenegger roles inspiring the covers and promotional materials for several Contra titles. Some examples are a poster for the Game Boy's Operation C, and the Japanese cover of Contra 3: The Alien Wars. Super C, on the other hand, pays homage to another action star of the 1980s, Sylvester Stallone. Funnily enough, all these references to 80s action stars were ultimately paid back thanks to the release of 2010's The Expendables, which featured both Stallone and Schwarzenegger. A free-to-play retro-inspired game was published to promote the film, which was clearly inspired by Contra. But this isn't the only impact Contra has had within media. Konami's 3rd Castlevania title on the Nintendo DS, Order of Ecclesia, references Contra with its first boss. The player has to fight Kimku, a recurring boss from Contra which appeared in Super C, and went on to appear in half a dozen other Contra titles. Another nod can be found in Silent Hill Shattered Memories. Towards the end of the game, players enter the Cinereal movie theater in the Toluca Mall, which also features several Konami arcade machines, including Contra. If the player looks at the Contra arcade for a while, the player's character Harry Mason will say, "Some real classics." Contra has also impacted TV. In the Season 5 episode of Robot Chicken, Catch Me If You Kangaroo Jack, there's a short sketch called Contra Lives, which you might have guessed parodies Contra. The segment also references the Konami code, which Contra popularized thanks to it giving the player 30 lives in this fairly difficult game. This isn't the only time Contra's been referenced on TV. The American TV show Supernatural has an episode called Safe House, where the characters Sam and Dean use the aliases Rizer and Bean, a sly nod to Bill Rizer and Lance Bean from Contra. Contra has left quite a legacy, but if you grew up outside of Japan and the Americas, you might know Contra by another name. Probotector. In Europe, the first few games that appeared on home consoles were renamed Probotector, with Bill and Lance being replaced by two robots called RD-008 and RC-011. All the humanoid enemies were also turned into robots, and anything resembling gore was removed. This was because Germany's Federal Department for Media Harmful to Young Persons had a law that prohibited the sale and/or advertisement of media deemed too violent for children. This would have limited the game's audience in Europe, so the decision was made to rework the game instead. This change in story and aesthetic lasted until Contra Legacy of War, which was when Europe started using the Contra name. But if you grew up in Europe and spent most of your days in the arcade, you might know Contra as Grizer. This was also the name given to the home computer ports of the game. It's not certain why the name Grizer was chosen for these ports, but it's worth noting that not only were several story elements changed, but the game's main character is called Lance Grizer. This character shares elements of both Bill and Lance, and one theory as to why the name Grizer was chosen is that there was some sort of error while translating Bill's surname, Riser. On a side note, there's a common misconception that Contra was originally titled Grizer in Japan. This is a misconception that's still prevalent today, and has gone so far as to be incorporated in Contra 4's museum bonus content. The exact origin of this misnomer is unknown. It's used in the file names of many ROM images of the early Contra games, especially the MSX2 version. Some websites even label the Japanese version of Super Contra as Super Grizer. Just as the origin of the name Grizer is unclear, the reason for Contra being renamed in these arcade and home computer versions is also unclear. After all, they retain many elements of the original game, as well as its aesthetic. It's believed that the name was changed to avoid any conflation with the Iran-Contra affair, an American scandal that took place in the late 80s. Essentially, the US government at the time planned to sell arms to Iran and use the proceeds to fund the Contras who were aiming to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. It's also believed that this is why Super Contra was renamed Super C when localized in North America, and why Game Boy's Contra title was renamed Operation C in the West. Either way, these naming issues were short-lived, and the name Contra would ultimately be used in all regions. However, there is one difference between the Japanese games and the Western releases that's been more or less consistent throughout the entire series. The Japanese games are actually easier. For example, in Contra Hardcore, the Japanese version gives all characters a life bar and they can be hit 3 times. This version also has unlimited continues, unlike the American and European versions, which don't even have a life bar, with a single bullet being certain death. But in the end, this level of difficulty is part of what made Contra popular in the West, and kept the series' die-hard fans coming back. But the series has plenty of fans in the East as well, including the developers of the latest entry of the series, Contra Returns. Many of this game's developers grew up playing the original Contra, so when they wanted to try developing an arcade shooter for mobile, they turned to Konami to see if they could use the Contra IP. Konami agreed to the project, and 3 years of development later, the game was finally released. As we mentioned at the start of this video, today's episode is sponsored by Contra Returns. This new title brings back this classic Contra gameplay, which you can now enjoy from anywhere you go for free. Contra Returns, available on both Android and iOS devices, offers over 200 levels of intense action, where you can have a solo run-and-gun experience, or go head-to-head in real-time 1-on-1 or 3-on-3 multiplayer. You can also choose from more than 10 different upgradable heroes, all with unlockable skills and a massive arsenal of weapons. Contra Returns also has throwbacks to the series' roots for the series' longtime fans, including over a dozen rearranged classic Contra tracks. In fact, Contra Returns has been nominated for 2 video game audio awards, including Best Music and Best Sound Design. Contra is one of the longest-running side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups out there, and this is the perfect opportunity to give the series a try. You can pre-register for Contra Returns to get a free tattooed Lance skin and in-game diamond currency, a total value of $15 when the game launches. To pre-register, simply use the link in the description of this video.